Okay, in this video we are going to look at graphing higher degree polynomials using all of your identification pieces as well as your graphing calculator. So first and foremost, when you are graphing higher degree polynomials, the first thing you want to look at is what the end behavior is going to be and what the maximum number of possible real zeros and turning points might be. Now with that, you need to know how to identify your maximum number of zeros and your maximum number of turning points. So the biggest thing you need to note here is that you will have at most n zeros, essentially where n is the degree. You will also have at most n minus 1 turning points. So in other words, whatever your degree is, that's going to tell you how many possible real zeros you have. And then take that degree, subtract 1, and that tells you how many turning points that you may have. Okay, so turning points essentially mean changing direction. So the first thing you need to do is determine that end behavior and then your maximum number of zeros and turning points. Then you need to find any y-intercepts that you have. Then you need to actually graph the function on your calculator, identifying your intercepts, your x-intercepts, and then noting where you cross or touch the x-axis. Okay. Now you can also use that graphing calculator to give you the exact maximum and minimum values. And then after you have all of that information, you can sketch the graph for yourself. So the easiest way is to look at an example. Okay. So here is a equation. So we have x to the fourth minus 4x cubed plus 3x squared. And we want to be able to graph that. So the first thing that we need to note is we need to note your end behavior. So again, with that, my highest degree is a 4, so my end behavior here is going to be even. My first term is positive, which means you are going to point up. Now after you identify your end behavior, you need to identify your max zeros. So my max zeros is going to be your degree, so in this case it's going to be 4. And then my maximum turning points, again, is n minus 4, so in this case it's going to be 3. Now, my y-intercept comes from putting all of your x's to 0, so in this case it's going to be through the origin, and that's because I don't have any constants here. Now, once you kind of get to this point, you can pull out your graphing calculator. Now the one that I have is the TI-84 Plus. So if yours is different than mine, of course doing this is going to be slightly different. So here, when you want to graph, you need to go to this button that says y equals. So on your graphing calculator, you need to open up whatever function button you have. Usually it's a y equals button. And then what you need to do is you need to input your equation. So here we need to put the x. So if you look, I have this button right here that says xt. This is my variable. So you're going to click it. Notice a big X is drawn. Now I need it to be x to the 4th. So on this calculator, we're going to hit this little hat button, and that's going to put you up into a power, and then obviously to the 4th. Now to get out of the power, you need to hit your arrow. So we're arrow over, and notice I now have a large square. So this is going to be minus 4, so we're going to go minus 4. But then we have x to the 3rd. So again, you need to hit your x button, hit your little hat button, and hit your 3rd. Arrow out of it, and we have plus 3. And then we have x. And at this point, you have two choices. Whenever you do squared, you can either go the little hat button or caret button, whatever you want to call it, and 2. Or on some calculators we actually have an x squared button, so if you click that button, notice it automatically gives you the square up there. Either one gives you that result that you need, so you just use personal preference. Now once you've input your function into your graph, the easiest thing to do is to immediately graph. Okay, so you hit your graph button, and notice it's going to be thinking. So you see these little dots that were going up in the upper corner, and so what that means is that the graph was actually thinking, and then notice it's now drawn a graph. Well, when we look kind of here towards my origin, it's a little bit muddied. So when you need to clarify your graph, the easiest thing to do is to come over here to your window, and you're looking at what your x max and min and your y max and min. Okay, so here this was set to -10 and 10, so I'm going to cut that in half and make it -5 and 5, and I'm going to do the same thing to my y's, so -5 and 5, and that's going to shrink my window down. So once I played with my window, you then hit graph again, and notice there's a lot more space, so the window looks bigger, and we can kind of see here in the window a little bit better. Okay, so once you get everything graphed, now we need to look at it. So first and foremost, we need to know that right here at the origin we appear to be touching, which would make sense considering that is where your y-intercept is. Okay, so here we know a few things. First, we know that at 0, so at the point 0, 0, so when x equals 0, we are touching the graph. Now the other thing that we have is we have these two other points where we are crossing, and we need to kind of know where those are and what's happening with that. Okay, so that means we need to find the zeros. Now there's an easy way to do that with your calculator. If you look, you can see all these blue across the top. Well, one of these right here above my trace says calc. To get to the blue, you would hit the second button. So I would hit second, and you can go to calc, and then notice it brings up a menu where I can choose, and it says I can find the value, the 0, the min, the max, the intersect, etc. So we want to look at 0. Okay, so we're going to come down to 0 and hit enter. Now it's giving me this blinking X. So what you want to do is you want to identify a left bound. So what I do is I like to get kind of somewhat close, so about there. You want to go on either side of it. So you hit enter when you identify your bound, and now notice it's asking you for the right bound. So this is where you want to make sure you go past where that 0 is, and then hit enter again. Now it's asking you to guess, so you go ahead and hit enter, and it's going to take a second and calculate exactly where that 0 is. So here it is telling me that I have a 0 at x equals 1. So with that, notice at this 0 we are crossing. So that's the first one. Okay, now I have another one. So again, I can go second, calc, come down to 0 and hit enter, and now I need to come all the way over, whoops, too far, to the left side of this next 0. Okay, so now that I'm on the left hand side of it, and there's my 0, I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. That's going to cement in that left bound. And now I need to go to the other side. So notice I'm now on the other side of that 0. I'm going to hit enter. Again, it's going to ask me to guess. And it's going to take a second and calculate that 0. So here this is telling me that I have that x equals 3. And if you look at your graph, notice you are crossing. So here we are going to cross it. Now the other thing that we need to know is we need to have some general idea on where that max and min is. So again, we can go to second, calc, and notice I have minimum and maximum. So you decide where to start. We are closest to this minimum point, so we'll go ahead and start there. Again, it wants the left bound, so we want the leftmost side of this minimum dip. So I'm going to come down to the left side of it. And you just kind of keep going till you're comfortable. So I'm clear that I'm on the left. Now I'm going to go around onto the right. And then again hit enter to guess. And it's going to tell me where that minimum point is. So here the other thing that I know is that I have a minimum at the point, and it's telling me about 2.366. So 2.366, and then the y value is negative 4.848. Negative 4.848. Okay. Now you also could have called this 2.4 and negative 4.8. Okay. It's just you're helpful for being able to graph it yourself. Now the other thing that we have is we have a maximum. So I'm going to move this over here. And so again, if you look at it, we have this tiny little maximum right here. So again, you would go second, calc. We would come down here to the maximum and identify it. Again, we want the left bound, so we're going to move our little blinking cursor up, and we're going to go to the left hand side of that maximum point, and then we got a cursor over to the right hand side, and then we're going to go ahead and do the guess. And so then here we have a maximum at the point 0.634 and 0.348. Again, or you could just have simply said 0.6 and 0.3. Now that we have all of that, we need to start actually sketching the graph. So once you have all of that, based on the information you've written down, you need to kind of sketch your graph. So first and foremost, I would put your intercept. So we know right here at the point 0, 0, we have an intercept point. We also know that at the point 1, 0, we have another one. And at the point 3, 0, so 2, 3, we have another one. Furthermore, we know that we have a minimum at the point 2.4, so a little over 2.5, and all the way down at 4.8, so 1, 2, 3, 4, almost to 5. And we know that we have a maximum at 0.6 and 0.3, so kind of right about in here. Now we know that we are crossing, so this one comes down to here, and we know that we are touching. This comes straight up, and then this side comes straight up. So if you take a look at the sketch and you compare it to your graph, notice they look pretty similar. Okay. So that is one example on how to graph some polynomials. Alright, let's take a look at one more example just to make sure that we all get it. So here again, we need to start off by identifying your end behavior. In this case, I have an odd, so this is odd, and it is negative. So what this means is that we're going to have opposite tails. Now, we need to do your max zeros. Because my highest degree is a 3, the max zeros is 3. And then we have your max turning points. Three minus 1 gives you 2. So now we can look at y-intercepts. Again, that means all of your x's become 0. The only thing left is this constant 8. Therefore, we have an intercept at the point 0, negative 8. And once we do that, we can go ahead and go into our calculator and start graphing so that we can identify your zeros. We need to identify where we're touching, where we're crossing, and what your max or mins might end up being. So, if you already have a graph on your calculator, then what you want to do is go back to your plot, and here you can just simply hit the clear button and it clears that right out. Now the other thing that you could do is you could turn the first plot off and use, say, your second plot. But if you don't want to do that, just simply clear it out and retype in. So here we're going to have negative, so I'm going to use the negative button, not the subtraction. And then again I have x, use little hat to the third, arrow out of it, plus 2, I'm going to use x squared, plus a 4x minus 8. And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to graph it. This is using the same window that I had set previously. And what you can see is that here my graph comes off the page. So when you do that, you need to zoom yourself out. Again, an easy way to do that would be to hit the window button. But you could also come over here to zoom. And if you hit zoom, you have some choices. One of the most favorite ones is down here, which is called Z standard or zoom standard, and if you hit that, it puts it back to a standard window. And notice in this case you can see everything you need. Now in case you want to know what standard window is from negative 10 to 10 for both x and y. Okay, so let's go back to the graph. Now when looking at this, we can notice that I have one x value where I cross and another x-intercept where it appears that I touch. So we need to figure out what those are. Again, the easiest thing to do is going to go to Second, Calc. And we're going to go ahead and start with your zeros. So when we do that, you can click Enter. Again, we want to go to the left-hand side, so I'm going to come all the way up. So I'm on the left side of that first 0 I'm looking at. Hit Enter. Move down to the right side, hit Enter, and then enter a third time for your guess. And so here this tells me that this 0 as a x is negative 2. So here, when I'm looking at my zeros, the first thing I have is that x equals negative 2, and I'm going to cross it. Now I need to look at my next 0. So again, Second Calc, come down to 0. I need to move over to the left-hand side of my next 0 point and hit Enter. Then I'm going to move over to the right-hand side, enter a third time for your guess, and it's going to tell you where the 0 is. So if you look at it, you can see that this is 1.99996 In other words, we have x equals 2, and in this case we are going to touch it. Now the last thing we have is we have max and we have mins. So first of all, you can look here where we are touching the x-axis. This would be your max. So we have a max point here at roughly 2, 0. So now we need to just simply know where the min value is. Again, second calc, we're going to come down here to minimum. We're going to move over so that we're on the left hand side of your valley. Hit enter. Move over to that right hand side, hit enter the third time so that it guesses. And in this case, we're going to have roughly negative 0.7 and negative 9.5. Now with that, we have everything that we need, again, to be able to graph our equation. So let's take a look. I put the calculator aside and let's see what we can do here. So my y-intercept is at the point 0, negative 8. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's down here. And then I have at 0, negative 2, or negative 2, 0. So 1, 2. And then I have at the point 2, 0. So 1, 2. Now, one thing that I know about it is that this one is cross or touching, and this one is crossing. So you can put those little notes to yourself as you need. Now, I'm told that my maximum is over here, so this side is going to come straight down like this, whereas this other side is going to come and meet up with my y-intercept. And then here, my minimum is going to be down here at 9.5, so it's going to go through my y-intercept down to 9.5, so roughly about there. And then it's going to curve around and it's going to come straight up like this. Okay. So notice, not totally perfect, but if I compare it to my graph here, it looks pretty darn close. Okay. So that's kind of everything you need to know to get started with graphing your higher degree polynomial functions, as well as a quick trip into how to start working with the graphing calculator. Now obviously, if your calculator is different than that TI-84, your methods and your steps may be slightly different than what we just talked about, but the idea should be about the same. So if you have any questions or need any help, let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.